The moment I saw Barbara from the HOA standing on my front porch holding a clipboard and wearing that condescending smile, I knew my peaceful Saturday morning was about to turn into absolute chaos. I had just poured my second cup of coffee and was looking forward to a quiet day in my workshop behind the house. My name is Samuel Morrison, and I had been living in the Pinecrest Heights subdivision in Rapid City, South Dakota, for 3 years. The neighborhood was nice enough, with its cookie-cutter houses and manicured lawns, but the HOA was something else entirely. Barbara Henderson, the HOA president, seemed to think she ran a military operation rather than a residential community. "Good morning, Samuel," she said through the screen door, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Do you have a moment to discuss a matter of urgent community importance?" I suppressed a groan and opened the door. Barbara was 52 years old, with short blonde hair cut in that typical speak-to-the-manager style, and she always dressed like she was heading to a business meeting even on weekends. Today, she wore a pressed blazer and khakis, with those reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. "What can I do for you, Barbara?" She adjusted her clipboard and launched into what sounded like a rehearsed speech. "As you know, we received quite a substantial snowfall last night, approximately 18 inches according to the Weather Service. The HOA has a responsibility to ensure that all community areas remain accessible and safe for residents." I nodded slowly, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The blizzard had hit us hard overnight, and my front yard looked like a winter wonderland. My John Deere tractor with the plow attachment sat in my driveway, exactly where I had left it after clearing my own property that morning. "I noticed you have a plow attachment," Barbara continued, pointing toward my tractor. "The HOA board held an emergency phone meeting this morning, and we've decided that since you have the equipment, you should clear all the common areas and driveways of board members. It's really a matter of community service." I blinked at her, wondering if I had heard correctly. "You want me to use my personal equipment to clear your driveways?" "Not just my driveway," she corrected, as if that made it better. "All 5 board members' driveways, plus the community clubhouse parking lot, the mail station area, and the entrance to the subdivision. We calculated it should only take you about 6 hours. "And why exactly would I do that?" Barbara's smile tightened. "Because according to Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the HOA bylaws, all residents are required to contribute to community maintenance when they have available resources. Your tractor is an available resource. That clause refers to lending tools for official HOA projects managed by the HOA," I said. I had actually read the entire bylaws document when I bought the house, specifically to avoid situations like this. "It doesn't mean I have to provide labor or use my equipment at your personal request." Her expression shifted from fake friendly to genuinely irritated in about 2 seconds flat. "Samuel, I'm not asking. This is an official HOA directive. If you refuse to comply, we'll have to issue a violation notice and fine you accordingly." "Fine me for what?" "Not volunteering my time and equipment. For failure to maintain community standards and refusal to assist with safety concerns," she said, making a note on her clipboard. "The fine starts at $500 and increases by $100 per day until compliance is achieved." I felt my jaw clench. This was typical Barbara. She constantly overstepped her authority and made up interpretations of the rules that benefited her and her cronies on the board. Last month, she had tried to fine my neighbor for having a vegetable garden that was supposedly too visible from the street. The month before that, she sent violation notices to 3 families for leaving their trash cans out 15 minutes past the designated pickup time. "Barbara, you can't just make up fines. That's not how this works. I have full authority as HOA president to enforce community standards," she said primly. "Now, are you going to be a team player, or do I need to proceed with the violation?" I looked past her at the snow-covered street. Several neighbors were out shoveling their own driveways and sidewalks. Old Mr. Chen from 3 houses down was struggling with his snowblower. Nobody else in the subdivision had a tractor, which I had purchased specifically for my 5-acre property on the edge of the development. I also used it for landscaping work and moving materials for my woodworking business. "Let me get this straight," I said carefully. "You want me to spend my entire Saturday plowing snow for you and the other board members, using my fuel, my equipment, and my time, or else you'll fine me $500. "Exactly." "I'm glad we understand each other." She checked her watch. "I expect you to start within the hour. I'll text you the addresses and the order we've prioritized. My driveway should be first, naturally, since I live closest to the entrance and guests will be arriving for the board's afternoon meeting." "No." The word hung in the cold air between us. Barbara's eyes widened, and her face started to turn an interesting shade of red that clashed with her blonde hair. "Excuse me," I said. "No, I'm not doing it. Send me whatever violation notice you want, but I'm not spending my day being your personal snow removal service." Barbara's professional facade cracked completely. "You are making a very big mistake, Samuel. The HOA has significant power to make your life difficult. We can fine you, we can put a lien on your property, we can make you regret this decision." "You can try," I said. "But I'm pretty sure a judge would be interested to hear how the HOA president is abusing her authority to get free labor." She pointed her pen at me like a weapon. "You haven't heard the last of this. The violation notice will be in your mailbox by end of day, and trust me, we will pursue this to the fullest extent of our authority." Barbara turned on her heel and marched back to her silver Lexus, which she had parked at an angle that blocked half my driveway. She peeled out, sending up a spray of slush that splattered across my truck. I stood there for a moment, feeling my blood pressure slowly returning to normal. Through the window, I could see my wife Victoria in the kitchen, shaking her head. She had witnessed the whole thing. Victoria came to the door as I stepped back inside. She was 36, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she had way more patience for HOA nonsense than I did. She worked as an accountant from home, which meant she witnessed way too many of Barbara's random property inspections and surprise visits. "That woman is unbelievable," Victoria said, handing me my coffee cup. "Using your personal tractor for free. Apparently I'm just a resource to be allocated according to Her Majesty's wishes," I said, taking a long sip of the now lukewarm coffee. "What are you going to do?" Exactly what I said. "Nothing. Let her send her violation notice. Let her try to fine me. I'll fight it at the next HOA meeting or take it to a lawyer if I have to." Victoria leaned against the counter, a worried expression on her face. "You know she's vindictive. Remember what she did to the Johnsons when they fought her on that fence thing?" I did remember. The Johnsons had wanted to install a 6-foot privacy fence in their backyard, which was within the HOA guidelines. But Barbara had decided she didn't like the style they chose and had made their lives miserable for months with violation notices about every tiny thing. Their grass was half an inch too long one week. Their mailbox needed repainting another week. Eventually, they had sold their house and moved just to escape the harassment. "I'm not the Johnsons," I said, "and I'm not backing down from this. What she's demanding is completely unreasonable." The rest of the morning passed quietly. I went out to my workshop and tried to focus on building a custom bookshelf for a client, but my mind kept drifting back to Barbara and her threats. Around 2 in the afternoon, I heard the distinctive sound of a diesel engine and looked out to see a small red pickup truck struggling through the unplowed street. It was pulling a trailer with a small plow attached, and it looked like the driver was having a hard time controlling it in the deep snow. The truck pulled into Barbara's driveway, 2 houses down from mine. I watched as a kid who couldn't have been more than 19 or 20 got out and started unhitching the plow. He looked cold and miserable, and from the way he was fumbling with the equipment, it was clear he had no idea what he was doing. I was about to go back to my woodworking when I saw Barbara come storming out of her house. Even from a distance, I could hear her shrill voice berating the kid. I couldn't make out the exact words, but the tone was unmistakable. She was standing there in her driveway, arms crossed, watching him struggle for about 10 minutes before she apparently gave up and went back inside. The kid worked for nearly an hour trying to clear Barbara's driveway. He managed to push most of the snow around, though it was more of a mess than an actual clearing. Then he moved on to another house, presumably belonging to one of the other board members. I went back inside for lunch and found Victoria at her laptop, frowning at the screen. "You got an email from the HOA," she said. "Well, from Barbara's personal email address, which she uses for HOA business." I pulled up the email on my phone. It was a formal violation notice, full of whereas clauses and official-sounding language. The gist was that I was being fined $500 for failure to comply with community maintenance requirements and refusal to assist with safety concerns. It demanded payment within 10 days and stated that the fine would increase as Barbara had threatened. "This is garbage," I muttered. "There's no basis for this in the actual bylaws." "Maybe you should talk to a lawyer," Victoria suggested. "Get ahead of this before it escalates." "I'll call Mike on Monday," I said. Mike Sullivan was a friend from college who had gone into real estate law. He had helped us with the paperwork when we bought the house and had warned us that the HOA seemed overly aggressive. The afternoon turned into evening, and I tried to put the whole situation out of my mind. Sunday came and went quietly. I plowed my own driveway again where some snow had drifted overnight, and I noticed that the kid with the red truck had done a mediocre job on the other driveways. There was still several inches of packed snow on most of them, and the piles he had created were blocking sidewalks and mailboxes. Monday morning, I called Mike and explained the situation. He laughed when I described Barbara's demand. "Let me guess," he said. "Barbara Henderson, HOA president who thinks she's running a Fortune 500 company? You know her. I've dealt with Pinecrest Heights HOA before. She tried to put a lien on someone's property for parking their work van in their own driveway overnight. The van was clearly marked as a plumbing company vehicle, which violated some insane commercial vehicle restriction she made up. We got it thrown out in about 5 minutes. So what do I do about this violation notice? Send me a copy of it and your HOA bylaws. I'll draft a response. Basically, she has zero authority to demand your personal property or labor. The clause she's citing doesn't apply, and even if it did, the fine structure she's threatening isn't in the bylaws. This is a pretty clear abuse of authority. Can she actually put a lien on my house? Not for something like this, no. The HOA can only place liens for legitimate unpaid assessments or fines that have been properly authorized according to the bylaws and state law. A made-up fine for not volunteering your tractor doesn't qualify. Send me that paperwork, and I'll handle it. I felt better after talking to Mike, but that relief was short-lived. On Tuesday afternoon, I got another email from Barbara. This one informed me that since I had not complied with the snow removal directive, The fine had been increased to $600, and I was now also being cited for having an unsightly vehicle in my driveway. The unsightly vehicle was, of course, my tractor. According to this new violation, the tractor violated Section 12 of the bylaws regarding commercial vehicles and equipment. The section actually stated that residents couldn't park commercial vehicles with business signage in their driveways overnight. But Barbara had creatively interpreted equipment to include my tractor. I forwarded everything to Mike, who responded with an increasingly annoyed email that he would add this to his response letter. Wednesday brought a winter storm advisory. Another 8 inches of snow fell overnight, and Thursday morning dawned cold and white. I was out at 6 in the morning, clearing my driveway again with the tractor. The machine handled beautifully, pushing through the heavy snow with ease. I finished my property in about 40 minutes and was heading back to the garage when I saw Barbara standing at the end of my driveway, wrapped in a puffy coat and looking like an angry marshmallow. "Since you're already out here with your tractor," she called out, "you might as well make yourself useful and clear the community areas like I originally asked." I shut off the engine. "Barbara, I'm not doing your plowing. I've told you this already." "Your fine is now at $800, she said smugly. "It's going to keep going up every day until you comply. You're being stubborn and childish, and it's going to cost you." "The fine is illegitimate and my lawyer is handling it." Her eyes narrowed. "You got a lawyer involved." "Over something this simple? You're wasting everyone's time and money. You're the one who decided to make this a legal issue by issuing fake violations." "They're not fake," she snapped. "I have full authority as HOA president and you're in violation of multiple bylaws. You know what? Fine. Keep being difficult. But don't say I didn't warn you about the consequences." She stomped back toward her house, which still had several inches of snow in the driveway from the latest storm. The kid with the red truck apparently hadn't come back, probably because he realized he was in over his head or Barbara hadn't wanted to pay him. Friday brought Mike's response letter, which he copied me on. It was 3 pages of legal language that politely but firmly explained all the ways Barbara had exceeded her authority. It cited specific sections of the South Dakota HOA laws, pointed out the contradictions in her interpretation of the bylaws, and demanded that all violation notices be withdrawn immediately. It also noted that if the HOA continued with this harassment, I would be pursuing legal action for damages and attorney's fees. I printed out a copy and hand-delivered it to Barbara's house Friday evening. She answered the door in yoga pants and a sweatshirt, clearly not expecting visitors. "This is from my attorney," I said, handing her the envelope. "I think you'll find it addresses all of your violation notices." She snatched the envelope from my hand. "We'll see what the board has to say about this at our meeting on Sunday. You do that." I walked back to my house feeling satisfied. Victoria had dinner waiting, and we spent a pleasant evening watching movies and pretending the HOA drama didn't exist. Saturday morning, I woke up to frantic knocking on my door. It was barely 7 in the morning, and I stumbled downstairs in my bathrobe to find Barbara on my porch again, but this time she looked genuinely distressed rather than just angry. "Samuel, I need your help," she said quickly. "Please, I know we've had our disagreements, but this is an emergency." I rubbed my eyes, trying to wake up fully. "What kind of emergency?" My mother had a fall. "She's in Sioux Falls at the hospital, and I need to drive down there right away, but I can't get my car out. The driveway is completely blocked with snow, and I can't reach anyone else who can plow it quickly." I looked past her at her driveway. It was true that it was in bad shape, with high banks of snow on either side and a solid layer of packed ice underneath from the kids' poor plowing job earlier in the week. What about the other board members? Richard is in Florida until next week. Susan's car broke down yesterday, and I can't reach Donald or Patricia. Please, Samuel. I know I've been difficult about this whole situation, but my mother might have broken her hip. I need to go. I considered for a moment. Despite everything, I wasn't heartless. If her mother was really hurt, that trumped our petty HOA battle. Give me 20 minutes to get dressed and get the tractor started. Relief flooded her face. Thank you. Really, thank you so much. I got ready quickly, pulled on my heavy winter gear, and went out to start up the John Deere. The engine turned over smoothly, and I drove it down to Barbara's driveway. It took me about 15 minutes to clear it properly, pushing the snow back into neat banks and scraping down to the pavement. Barbara came out as I was finishing, carrying an overnight bag. I really appreciate this, Samuel. I'm sorry about all the trouble this week. When I get back, we'll sort out this whole violation notice mess. I might have been a bit overzealous. A bit, I agreed. Drive safe. I hope your mother's okay. She got into her Lexus and carefully backed out of the newly cleared driveway. I watched her navigate down the street, which was still covered in snow and ice, and then I drove my tractor back home. Victoria was in the kitchen making breakfast. That was decent of you, she said. Even after everything she put you through, her mother's hurt. That's different. You're a good person, Sam. Sunday afternoon brought the HOA board meeting, which was held at the community clubhouse. The clubhouse was a modest building near the entrance of the subdivision, with a main room for gatherings and a small kitchen. I decided to attend, both to address the violation notices in person and to see what the board had to say about Barbara's behavior. When I arrived, I found about 20 other residents already there, which was unusual. Normally, only a handful of people bothered to show up to these meetings. I recognized several of them as people who had been on the receiving end of Barbara's overreach in the past. Barbara sat at the front table with the 4 other board members. Richard was apparently back from Florida early, a heavy-set man in his 60s who owned a car dealership in Rapid City. Susan was a thin woman in her 50s who always seemed nervous and rarely spoke. Donald was a retired Army officer who treated every HOA issue like a military operation. And Patricia was a real estate agent who used every HOA meeting as a networking opportunity. Barbara called the meeting to order and launched into the usual routine of reading minutes and discussing community business. She looked tired, and I later learned that her mother's hip was indeed broken and would require surgery. Despite that, Barbara seemed determined to maintain her iron grip on the proceedings. When we got to new business, I raised my hand. "Yes, Samuel," Barbara said, her tone noticeably cooler than it had been on Saturday morning when she needed my help. "I'd like to address the violation notices I received regarding snow removal and my tractor. That matter is under review by the board," she said dismissively. "We'll send you our decision in writing." "I think it should be discussed now, with the community present," I said firmly. "Especially since it affects how the HOA board interprets its authority over residents' personal property." A murmur of agreement went through the crowd. Barbara looked annoyed but nodded. "Fine. You have 5 minutes." I stood up and gave a brief summary of what had happened, reading from the violation notices and explaining how Barbara had demanded use of my tractor, and then issued escalating fines when I refused. I also mentioned the bogus citation about the tractor being an unsightly commercial vehicle. "The issue here isn't about snow removal," I concluded. "It's about whether the HOA board has the authority to commandeer residents' personal property and labor for their own convenience, According to my attorney and the actual bylaws, they don't. Several residents started talking at once. Mrs. Chen, whose husband I had watched struggling with his snowblower, stood up. Barbara told me last month that my garden decorations were in violation and I had to remove them, she said. But they weren't in violation of anything. She just didn't like them. If she's making up rules about snow removal, how many other rules is she making up? That opened the floodgates. For the next 30 minutes, resident after resident stood up and shared their own stories of Barbara's overreach. The vegetable garden that was supposedly too visible. The fence dispute. A man named Gary talked about being fined for having his trash visible from the street at 3 in the afternoon on a non-pickup day, even though he had just gotten home from work and was about to bring it in. A young couple described being threatened with violations because their infant's crying could be heard outside, which Barbara claimed violated noise ordinances. The board members looked increasingly uncomfortable. Richard kept glancing at Barbara, who sat rigid in her chair, her face getting redder and redder. Finally, Richard cleared his throat. I think we need to take a brief recess so the board can discuss these concerns in executive session. The 5 board members retreated to the small kitchen area. Through the door, we could hear raised voices, though not clear enough to make out words. After about 20 minutes, they returned. Richard spoke instead of Barbara, which was telling. The board has reviewed the violation notices issued to Samuel Morrison, and we've decided to withdraw them. The interpretation of the maintenance clause was overly broad, and we acknowledge that residents cannot be required to provide personal equipment or labor beyond the scope of normal community assessments. A small victory, but I wasn't entirely satisfied. What about the fine amounts that were cited? Are those being removed from my account? There were no actual fines assessed, Barbara interjected, speaking for the first time since the recess. Those were warnings about potential fines if the violations weren't corrected. The notices specifically stated I was being fined $500, increasing by $100 per day, I said. That's not a warning. That's an assessment. Mike had told me to push back on this point. If they tried to claim the fines were actually assessed, they would have had to follow proper procedures, including written notice and an opportunity for a hearing. Since they hadn't done that, they were stuck either admitting the fines were fake threats or admitting they violated their own procedures. Richard looked at Barbara, who seemed to be grinding her teeth. The notices were improperly worded, he said carefully. No fines have been formally assessed or recorded. The notices are withdrawn and there will be no fines related to this matter. I'd like that in writing, I said. You'll have it by tomorrow, Richard agreed. The meeting wrapped up shortly after that, with several residents approaching me to thank me for standing up to Barbara. As I was leaving, Donald, the retired Army officer on the board, pulled me aside. Between you and me, he said quietly, Barbara's been getting worse over the past year. She treats this like her personal fiefdom. A bunch of us on the board have been talking about not renominating her when her term ends in April. That would probably be good for everyone, I said. Just keep your head down until then. She's vindictive when she feels challenged. I thanked him for the advice and headed home, where Victoria was waiting to hear how it went. I filled her in on everything, and we agreed that while the immediate crisis was over, Barbara was likely to continue being a problem. I had no idea how right we were. Monday morning started with another snowfall, this one lighter at around 4 inches. I cleared my driveway before heading into my workshop for a day of work. Around noon, I took a break and checked my phone to find a text message from my neighbor Jim, whose house was on the opposite side of Barbara's. "Dude, you need to see what's happening on your street." I went outside and walked toward the front of the subdivision. What I saw made me stop in my tracks. Someone had plowed all the snow from the community entrance area and piled it in massive banks along both sides of my driveway. The piles were easily 6 feet high and completely blocked access to my property. My truck, which I had parked on the street that morning because I had the tractor in the garage, was completely buried. I walked back to get a better view and realized that snow had been strategically placed to cause maximum inconvenience. The piles extended across the sidewalk in front of my house, blocked my mailbox, and created a wall that would take hours to clear. Jim came out of his house. "That's messed up, man. I saw the township plow come through about an hour ago. The driver made like 4 passes, just piling everything in front of your place. The township plow, the county doesn't normally clear our streets." "I know, right? That's why I noticed. It was weird." I pulled out my phone and called the county highway department. After being transferred twice, I got someone who could check the records. "We didn't have any trucks in Pinecrest Heights today," the woman told me. "Our route doesn't include subdivision streets. That's the responsibility of either the residents or the HOA. So if someone was driving a plow truck in my neighborhood, it wasn't county." "No, sir. Might have been a private contractor." "Did you want to report something?" I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing. A private plow truck had shown up and deliberately buried my driveway in snow. That wasn't a coincidence. That was retaliation. I went back inside and called Mike. He listened to my description and swore under his breath. "That's property damage at minimum, possibly harassment. Did anyone get pictures? I'll take some now. And I'll ask the neighbors if anyone got photos of the truck." I spent the next hour documenting everything from multiple angles and canvassing the nearby houses. Mrs. Chen had been looking out her window and had actually taken a short video on her phone when she noticed what was happening. The video clearly showed a large pickup truck with a plow attachment making multiple deliberate passes to pile snow in front of my property. "I thought it was strange," Mrs. Chen said. "Usually they push snow to the sides evenly. This man was very focused on your house." "Did you see who was driving?" "Not clearly. But I think it was a younger person, maybe the same one who did the driveways last week." I thanked her and sent the video to Mike, who forwarded it to a private investigator friend of his. Meanwhile, I had to actually deal with the snow. I fired up the John Deere and spent the next 3 hours clearing the massive piles. It was back-breaking work, made worse by the fact that the snow had already started to compact and freeze. By the time I finished, it was dark and I was exhausted. Victoria had dinner ready and I collapsed at the table. "This is getting out of hand," she said. "Barbara's crossed a line from being annoying to actually causing property damage." "I know. Mike's looking into it. If we can prove Barbara hired someone to do this, we might have grounds for a lawsuit." Tuesday brought an unexpected development. Mike called me in the morning with news. My PI friend tracked down the kid with the red pickup. His name is Tyler something, and he's a community college student who does odd jobs. He admitted that Barbara hired him on Sunday night to plow the entrance area and specifically told him to pile all the snow in front of your house. She actually told him to do that. Yep. He's willing to make a statement because apparently Barbara stiffed him on payment. She promised him $200, but only paid him $50 and told him that was all he was getting. He's pretty pissed about it. So we have evidence that Barbara deliberately damaged my property as retaliation. Essentially, yes. I'm drafting a cease and desist letter, and I'd recommend you also file a police report for the property damage and harassment. This has gone beyond a civil HOA dispute. I drove to the Rapid City Police Department that afternoon and filed a report. The officer who took my statement seemed skeptical at first, but when I showed him the photos, the video, and explained the pattern of behavior, he took it more seriously. HOA disputes can get ugly, he said. We've had a few cases where board members went off the rails. I'll write this up, and an officer will probably want to talk to this Barbara Henderson and the kids she hired. What happens then depends on what they say. If it's clear she deliberately caused damage to your property, we might cite her for criminal mischief. If the harassment continues, you could potentially get a restraining order. I left the police station feeling like things were finally being taken seriously. When I got home, I found Victoria on the phone with her sister, who lived in Denver. "You won't believe what's happening now," she was saying. "Sam had to file a police report against the HOA president. After she hung up, we discussed our options. The house was great, the neighborhood was mostly fine, but Barbara's presence was poisoning everything. If she stayed on as HOA president, we would have at least another year of this nonsense, even with the legal pushback." Wednesday morning brought a visit from Officer Jennifer Martinez, who was following up on my police report. She was a no-nonsense woman in her mid-30s who took detailed notes as I walked her through everything that had happened. "I'll be talking to Miss Henderson this afternoon," she said. "I've also got a statement from the young man she hired, and he's confirmed that she specifically directed him to pile the snow in front of your property. That gives us enough for a criminal mischief charge." "What does that mean exactly?" "It's a misdemeanor in South Dakota. If we charge her and she's convicted, she'd face a fine and potentially up to 30 days in jail, though jail time is unlikely for a first offense. More importantly, it creates an official record of the harassment." That afternoon, I happened to be working in my front workshop when I saw Officer Martinez's patrol car pull up to Barbara's house. She was there for about 45 minutes. I couldn't see what was happening, but I could imagine Barbara's reaction to being questioned by the police. Jim texted me later that evening. "Whole neighborhood is talking about the cops visiting Barbara. What did she do?" I gave him a brief summary, and within an hour my phone was buzzing with messages from various neighbors. The story had spread like wildfire. Barbara, the iron-fisted HOA president who had terrorized residents for years, was being investigated for criminal harassment. Thursday morning, I received an email from Richard, the board vice president. He wanted to meet with me to discuss a resolution to the ongoing situation. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop in downtown Rapid City, on neutral ground away from the subdivision. Richard showed up looking tired and worried. He ordered a black coffee and got straight to the point. "Barbara's become a liability to the HOA," he said. "The board held an emergency meeting last night, and we've asked her to resign as president effective immediately." "Did she agree?" "Not exactly. She stormed out of the meeting and said she'd fight it. But according to our bylaws, if 4 out of 5 board members vote to remove an officer for cause, we can do it. We voted 4-1, with Barbara voting against, obviously." "So she's off the board?" "No, she's still a board member. But she's no longer president, and she no longer has authority to issue violation notices or speak for the HOA. I'm taking over as president for the remainder of the term." "That's a start," I said. "What about the violation notices and everything else, all withdrawn formally and in writing?" "You'll have the documentation by this evening. We're also sending a letter to all residents clarifying the limits of HOA authority and apologizing for the overreach." "And the criminal charges," Richard winced. "That's between Barbara and the police. The HOA board isn't involved, and frankly, given what she did, I think she brought it on herself. Off the record, several of us have been concerned about her behavior for a while. This situation with you was just the tipping point." We talked for a few more minutes about other HOA business, and Richard assured me that the board wanted to take a more reasonable approach going forward. He seemed sincere, and I was cautiously optimistic. When I got home, I found an official-looking envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a letter from the Rapid City Police Department informing me that Barbara Henderson had been charged with 1 count of criminal mischief and 1 count of harassment. A court date was set for 3 weeks later. That evening, Victoria and I went out to dinner to celebrate. It felt like we had finally turned a corner. The HOA drama wasn't completely over, but at least Barbara was no longer in a position to abuse her authority. Friday brought an unexpected twist. I was in my workshop sanding down a custom dining table when my phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Barbara. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello, Samuel, this is Barbara." Her voice was stiff and formal. "I'm calling to discuss the charges that have been filed against me. I don't think we should be talking directly. My lawyer advised me not to have any contact with you outside of official channels. Please, just hear me out for a moment." She sounded different, less imperious and more desperate. "I made mistakes. I know that now. I was stressed about my mother's health, and I took it out on you and others in the neighborhood. I'm willing to make this right." "By doing what?" "I'll pay for any damages you incurred. I'll formally apologize to you and the other residents. I'll resign from the HOA board entirely, not just as president. I'll do whatever it takes to resolve this without going to court." I leaned against my workbench, considering. Part of me wanted to see her face the full consequences of her actions. She had made my life miserable for weeks, and she had done the same to countless other residents before me. But another part of me just wanted the whole thing to be over. "That's not really up to me," I said. "The criminal charges are being prosecuted by the county. Even if I wanted to drop everything, which I'm not saying I do, the decision isn't mine. But you could talk to the prosecutor. You could explain that we've reached a resolution. Barbara, you deliberately hired someone to vandalize my property. You issued fake fines and harassment notices. You abused your position to intimidate residents for years. Why should I help you avoid the consequences?" There was a long silence on the other end. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "Because I'm asking. Because I know I was wrong. Because my mother is dying, and I'm dealing with that badly, and I made terrible decisions. Because I have grandchildren who don't need to see their grandmother going to jail. You're not going to jail for a misdemeanor. Maybe not, but a criminal record would destroy my reputation. I've lived in Rapid City my whole life. I know I was a terrible HOA president. I know I hurt people, but I'm asking for a chance to make it right." I told her I would think about it and ended the call. Victoria found me a few minutes later, staring at the half-finished table. "That was Barbara," I said. "She wants me to talk to the prosecutor about dropping the charges. Are you going to?" "I don't know. Part of me thinks she deserves whatever she gets, but I also don't love the idea of dragging this out for months in court. What does Mike say?" I called Mike and explained the conversation. He was skeptical. "People like Barbara don't usually change," he said. "She's only sorry because she got caught and charged. If she had gotten away with it, she'd still be terrorizing the neighborhood." Probably true. That said, if she's willing to pay damages and resign from the board entirely, that might be worth something. The criminal case will probably result in a fine and probation anyway. It's not like she's going to prison. So what would you recommend? Get everything in writing. If she wants a deal, make her sign a legally binding agreement that includes financial compensation, a formal apology, immediate resignation from the HOA board, and a commitment not to run for the board again. Also, A non-disparagement clause so she can't go around bad-mouthing you. If she agrees to all that, then maybe you talk to the prosecutor about whether they'd be willing to offer a plea deal. Over the weekend, I drafted the terms with Mike's help and sent them to Barbara on Sunday night. Monday morning, she sent back a signed copy along with a check for $5,000 to cover my legal fees, time, and damages. I called the county prosecutor's office and spoke to the assistant district attorney handling Barbara's case. I explained that we had reached a civil settlement and asked if that affected the criminal case. It doesn't make the charges go away, the ADA said, but it does factor into whether we pursue this aggressively or offer a plea deal. Given that it's her first offense and there's been restitution, I'd probably offer a plea to disturbing the peace with a fine and probation. She'd still have a record, but it would be minor. That seems fair, I said. The next HOA meeting was the first one in months that didn't feel hostile. Richard ran the meeting efficiently and without drama. Barbara was conspicuously absent, having formally resigned from the board the previous week. The residents seemed lighter, like a weight had been lifted. At the end of the meeting, Richard announced that the board would be holding elections in April for all positions, and he encouraged residents to get involved. Several people raised their hands to volunteer, including Mrs. Chen and Gary, the guy who had been fined for his trash can timing. "I think we're going to have a real board this time," Jim said to me as we walked out. "People who actually care about the community instead of just wanting power." Barbara's court date came and went with little fanfare. She accepted the plea deal the prosecutor offered, pleading guilty to disturbing the peace and paying a $2,000 fine plus court costs. She received 2 years of probation and was ordered to complete anger management classes. I ran into her once after that at the grocery store in late March. She was with an older woman in a wheelchair who I assumed was her mother, post-hip surgery. We made eye contact briefly, and she gave a small nod before turning down a different aisle. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was acknowledgement. The snow had started to melt by then, revealing the dead grass and mud underneath. Spring was coming to Rapid City, and with it, the promise of a better year. Victoria and I had decided to stay in Pinecrest Heights, at least for now. The neighborhood itself was nice, and with Barbara gone, the HOA was already becoming more reasonable. I used my tractor that spring to help several neighbors with yard work and gardening projects. Mrs. Chen wanted to expand her vegetable garden, so I helped till the soil. Gary needed help moving some landscaping stones, so I drove the tractor over, and we spent an afternoon redesigning his front yard. The new HOA board, elected in April, took a dramatically different approach. They focused on actual community needs rather than petty enforcement. They organized neighborhood gatherings and worked on fixing long-neglected common areas. The community clubhouse got a fresh coat of paint and new furniture. The entrance sign, which had been looking shabby for years, was replaced. In May, the subdivision held a community yard sale, and I set up a table selling some of my woodworking projects. Barbara drove past at one point but didn't stop. Her house went up for sale 2 weeks later, and by July, she had moved to somewhere in Arizona to be closer to her daughter. I sometimes wonder if she learned anything from the experience. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. But at least she was no longer in a position to abuse what little power she had. The HOA, under Richard's leadership, and then under Gary's after he was elected president, became what it was supposed to be, a group of neighbors working together to maintain their community, not a tool for one person's ego. The tractor remained in my driveway, and nobody ever complained about it again. I used it to plow my own driveway when the next winter came, and I helped out a few elderly neighbors who had trouble with their driveways. But I did it because I wanted to, not because anyone demanded it. One cold morning in December, almost exactly a year after the whole mess with Barbara had started, I was out plowing my driveway when Richard walked over. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee from the local shop. "Thought you could use this," he said, handing me one. "Thanks," I said, shutting off the tractor. "What's up?" "Just wanted to thank you, actually, for standing up to Barbara last year. A lot of us wanted to, but nobody had the guts. You forced the issue and it made everything better." "I didn't really have a choice. She was being ridiculous." "Maybe. But you could have just sold your house and moved like the Johnsons did. Instead, you fought back. The HOA is actually functional now because of that." We stood there in the cold, drinking our coffee and watching the snow fall. It was peaceful, the kind of quiet winter morning that made living in South Dakota worthwhile. "You know what the funny thing is," I said. "I actually kind of miss having something to fight against. Life's been pretty boring lately." Richard laughed. "Don't jinx it. Give it time. Some other issue will come up, but at least it won't be someone demanding your tractor." He was right about that. The HOA dealt with the usual minor disputes over the following months: noise complaints and parking issues and disagreements about the community budget. But nothing rose to the level of Barbara's reign of terror. I expanded my woodworking business that next year, taking on bigger custom projects. Victoria got a promotion at her accounting firm. We talked about maybe looking for a bigger property eventually, somewhere with more land where I could have a proper workshop. But we weren't in any hurry. Pinecrest Heights had become home, and despite everything that had happened, we were happy there. The story of Barbara and the tractor became something of a legend in the neighborhood. New residents would hear about it and seek me out to ask if it was true. I always confirmed that yes, the HOA president had tried to commandeer my tractor, and yes, I had fought back, and yes, she had ended up with criminal charges and had to resign. "Good for you," they usually said. "HOAs can be the worst." But ours wasn't, not anymore. It was just a group of neighbors trying to keep their community nice. And that was exactly what it should have been all along. I still see the tractor every time I pull into my driveway, sitting there like a loyal dog waiting for its next job. It's more than just a piece of equipment now. It's a reminder that sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, even when it would be easier to just go along. It's a symbol of the battle I fought, and won against petty tyranny and overreach. And every winter, when the snow starts falling and I fire up that John Deere to clear my driveway, I think about how different things could have been. If I had given in to Barbara's demands that first day, I would have spent every winter at her beck and call, plowing driveways for board members who thought they were entitled to my labor. The precedent would have been set, and other residents would have faced similar demands. Instead, I said no. It was really that simple. One word, 2 letters, but it changed everything. Victoria came out one particularly snowy morning with hot chocolate as I was finishing up the driveway. She handed me the mug and stood watching as I took the last few passes with the plow blade. "You ever regret it?" she asked. All the drama and hassle with Barbara, I thought about it as I shut off the engine. No, not even a little bit. It was the right thing to do. Even though it took months to resolve and cost us thousands in legal fees, even though. Some things are worth fighting for, and this was one of them. Besides, we got most of the money back from Barbara's settlement. She leaned against the tractor. "You know what I think? I think you actually enjoyed it. The fight, I mean. You had a clear villain and a clear principle to defend. It was straightforward in a way that most life problems aren't." She wasn't wrong. There had been something satisfying about the whole thing, despite the stress. It was nice to have a problem that could actually be solved with good guys and bad guys and a resolution. The neighborhood continued to thrive under the new HOA leadership. The community garden that Mrs. Chen had championed became a popular gathering spot. The annual holiday lights competition, which Barbara had canceled for being too frivolous, was reinstated and became a neighborhood tradition. Property values in Pinecrest Heights actually increased, partly because word got around that the HOA was no longer run by a tyrant. I heard through the grapevine that Barbara had indeed moved to Arizona, to a community that had no HOA at all. Maybe she had learned her lesson. Maybe she was terrorizing her new neighbors in different ways. I didn't really care. She was gone, and that was what mattered. The tractor developed a minor hydraulic leak that summer, and I spent a weekend fixing it with help from Gary and Jim. We turned it into a neighborhood event, with a grill going and kids running around the yard. It was the kind of community moment that never would have happened under Barbara's watch. "This thing's built like a tank," Gary said, lying underneath the tractor to help me access the leak. "What year is it?" 2012. "Got it used from a farm equipment dealer out near Sturgis. It'll probably outlast all of us." He was probably right. The John Deere was solid, dependable, built to work hard and last forever, kind of like the principle of standing up for yourself. As the years went on, the Great Tractor Incident, as it came to be known, faded into neighborhood lore. New residents moved in, and the story got passed along with varying degrees of accuracy. In some versions, Barbara had tried to steal my tractor in the middle of the night. In others, I had used it to block her driveway in retaliation. The truth was more mundane but no less important. I never did have to use the tractor to move snow back onto anyone's driveway as retaliation, despite what the threat in my mind had been. The actual solution had been more procedural: lawyers and police reports and civil settlements. But the willingness to fight back, to not just accept an unjust demand, that had been the real weapon. On quiet mornings when I was out in my workshop, building furniture and listening to the radio, I sometimes thought about what would have happened if I had just done what Barbara asked that first day. I could have spent 6 hours plowing driveways for board members. It would have been annoying but not the end of the world, but then it would have happened again and again. Every snowfall would have brought a demand for my labor, my equipment, my time. Other residents would have faced similar demands. Barbara's power would have grown unchecked, and the neighborhood would have become even more unbearable. By saying no, I had done more than just protect my own interests. I had established a boundary that protected everyone. Sometimes that's what it takes. One person willing to fight the small battle so that others don't have to fight bigger ones later. The tractor sat in my driveway, a quiet testament to a year of conflict and resolution. It was just a machine, metal and hydraulics and diesel fuel. But it represented something bigger: the idea that you don't have to accept unreasonable demands just because they come from someone with a title or a clipboard. Barbara Henderson had learned that lesson the hard way. The residents of Pinecrest Heights had learned it too, though in a more positive way. We learned that HOAs didn't have to be tyrannical, that boards could be accountable, that communities functioned better when people worked together instead of being ruled by fear. And I learned that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hard thing, and that's okay. Standing up to Barbara had been stressful and time-consuming and expensive. But it had been worth it, every single moment. The snow kept falling in South Dakota winters, and I kept plowing my driveway. Life went on, seasons changed, and the community grew stronger. And through it all, the John Deere sat ready, a tool and a symbol both, representing the simple power of saying no when no is the right answer.